right. Today's video could get pretty involved. I'm hoping that it won't be overly lengthy, though. I'm going to try to do my absolute best to keep my thoughts condensed and pithy, and that would actually make it probably easier for people following the video to grasp the concepts that are being elucidated. I wanted to talk about theodicy, which of course is a subject having to do with evil, the nature of evil, how evil relates, or how we should understand evil relative to God. What is God's role, if any, in it? And so I thought the best way to articulate the Dharmic view would be to contrast it as best I can with the Orthodox Christian perspective on it. The best way, I think, or the best place to start in order to do that would be to briefly revisit the issue of the creator-creature distinction. And so I would start by saying, first by noting that both philosophies have a creator-creature distinction. That's a basic, very basic starting point for both philosophies. But the nature of that distinction is understood differently. So obviously the Orthodox perspective is that God created all things out of nothing. Ex nihilo is the Latin term that is always used there. Out of nothing. The best way to contrast that with the Dharmic view is to describe the Dharmic view of the cosmos and its creation, or its being brought into manifestation, in Nicene terms. We would use the phraseology, we would have no problem with the phraseology that Nicaea uses of the Logos, when it says light from light. That's how we would describe ourselves. We are light from light, in contrast to the Orthodox position that we came into being out of nothing, ex nihilo. So as a result, we would say that we are by nature divine. We possess the divinity of the Creator. But there's still a distinction, because the Creator obviously brought us into being. So we are not identical with the source, although, we are the effects of the source, but we share his nature. So that's how the distinction would be explained. Now I'm going to show how that basic understanding, that basic difference affects. I'm going to go down the ladder and show you how it affects a few other things. So, and I've got my notes here, so I'm kind of glancing over at them here. The second thing I would want to point out then, as a result, is that the very understanding of revelation itself is understood completely differently. In the Orthodox perspective, revelation is something external. It comes down to us from above, so to speak. It is revealed prophetically. It's revealed, in visions, and it's revealed in a book. It's dictated, more or less, by the Holy Spirit to the authors. In Dharma, and that's not to say, by the way, as a side note, that prophecy doesn't exist within Dharma, or that Dharmic saints don't prophesy, or that there isn't such a thing as dreams or visions. Those exist, but they're understood in a very different fashion. Revelation is understood in a very different context. In Dharma, revelation is something internal or intrinsic. It is part of nature. Nature itself reveals the will of God. This is how we understand, this is what informs our ethics. It's what informs our morality. There are moral principles, many moral principles within Dharma that would fully coincide with the moral principles of Christianity, but we don't get them from a book. We don't think God had to reveal it at a particular time, in a particular place, to a particular person or group of people in a particular way, because it's universal. Everyone accesses this morality by being part of the world that he created and observing within their own experience, internally within their own bodies through meditation. When they experience God, they experience what it's like to be in communion with him and what it's like to be out of communion with him. When they observe in the world that he created, nature actually teaches us principles that inform how we live. So revelation is external in Orthodoxy. Another way to say that is to say that it is judicial. God gives a command in the garden. When that command is refused, God gives a declaration of judgment. It's like a court hearing, right, where the judge issues a verdict. It's not like that in Dharma. Now, there's a Dharmic way. There's actually a Dharmic way to understand the nature of the command that God gave Adam and Eve to avoid the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but I don't want to get too far astray, so we're going to do that maybe another time, explain that. But I don't want to get distracted. So we're just gonna note that the Orthodox view is judicial and external when it comes to the notion of revelation, whereas it's intrinsic and therefore natural. So Dharma believes in natural law or natural theology or natural revelation. And so as a result, God tends to be viewed as a passionate being rather than as a passionless being in Orthodoxy. Now, I know that the Orthodox Church likes to make a big deal out of God being passionless because it fits into their mysticism, their mystical philosophy, or their mystical theology. When they elucidate on the when they're explaining the matter of hesychasm and how hesychastic mysticism works, of course they describe it in terms of the result being that we become more like God in the sense of becoming passionless and overcoming the sinful passions like envy, jealousy, rage, lust, and so on. However, there is an incongruence there because when you look at the Old Testament, you see a God that is storming up and down, enraged by this or that, emotionally issuing judgment. It's not a passionless judgment that he gives. It's very emotional. He gets jealous of other gods. He even calls himself a jealous God. He calls himself a god of war. A carnage is a pretty normal thing in the Old Testament when God gets angry. Now, that's not to say that there aren't judgments in Dharma. God judges in Dharma. And in fact, you look at the Puranas, and there's a whole account of the worldwide flood. But it doesn't describe God as being angry and looking down on the earth and saying, you guys have messed up. You've fallen short in every way possible. I'm going to bring this upon you. I'm going to do this to you. The language is very different because the nature of judgment is conceived very differently. And I'll just say one or two things about that. So yeah, it's more when apocalyptic events occur or catastrophes occur, whether on an individual level or on a civilizational level, that is understood more in terms of the karmic result. karmic results, whether positive or negative, occur in response to the cumulative good and bad effects that result from our actions. And so judgment and reward are naturally built into the very fabric of reality, the very fabric of nature. It just naturally works itself out. Whereas in the Bible, you see a God who gets very upset and he reacts, and reward and judgment are dished out based on his emotional reaction one way or the other. So even though Orthodox would say that these are merely anthropomorphisms, it's kind of odd at the same time, because these are not characteristics that you would want to encourage in Christians. We were never encouraged to behave that way. We were encouraged to be the absolute opposite. Now, one might say, well, he's God, he can do whatever he wants. But that's not the issue. The issue is that if he's God, he can't be disturbed. Nothing can disturb God because he is complete within himself. Nothing can upset him or ruin his day or topple his apple cart. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Now, the fourth point, there's two other big points I need to make. The matter of sin or evil. What is sin? What is evil? And what is the Dharmic understanding of that? Well, again, we're going to contrast it with the Orthodox position. So the Orthodox, there's different ways we could unpack this, but I'm just going to look at it from one particular angle. When you look at the Orthodox position on evil, evil is something that is capable within beings, whether they're fallen angels or human beings. It's something that's capable of growing and metastasizing to the point that it takes on a state of permanence. And as a result, it becomes irreversible. And then when you put off the body, that's when it becomes officially irreversible, when you put off the body and you die in a state of non-repentance. You continue to live forever in this state of permanent opposition to God. So even if, as some Orthodox would nuance it, even if sin is uprooted, or at least it's no longer active in the person who is now living in total separation from God in hell, the principle of evil continues to exist in that person, remains incarnated in that person, in the sense that that individual remains eternally apart from God. So now you have two ontological principles that are completely separate, completely independent of each other, which means that evil sort of has its own autonomous ontological status, which is preserved forever. So you have this eternal duality. In Dharma, sin is conceived of as ignorance. Now, I have to clarify this. It's not an ignorance that, oh, I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. Let's give that guy a free pass. It's not about not knowing that something is, that something violates the natural order or God's purpose or God's will. It's the fact that we are not doing something to violate a law that gets this Zeus figure over here flaming angry and upset with us. we, being individuated consciences, not being invested with the infinite qualities of the divine, but having being invested only with those qualities to a finite degree, we have to learn from experience what harms us and what doesn't harm us. What results in us falling further away and what results in our being drawn nearer to our source. So it's understood more karmically rather than legalistically. And so sin or evil would be a falling short of who we are in essence, who we are in our nature. Whereas in Orthodoxy, it tends to be seen as a falling short of a principle or a command or a directive or a mandate which comes down to us from above and will elicit a response that is either expressive of God's pleasure or displeasure. I guess that's the best way to sum that up. So now the fifth and final point is this. In the Orthodox view, although they wouldn't describe their position this way, I am unabashedly describing it this way because I see it as the natural, logical result of certain first principles that they hold to, which I've already elucidated a few of those or articulated a few of those at the beginning of the video. In the Orthodox Christian view, God is only light. He's only light. So good and evil, and I'm going back here to some notes I took. I took some longer notes on this, so I'm going to go ahead and revert to them. Good and evil are diametrically opposed. They are diametrical opposites, which means, as I just noted a moment ago on point 4, regarding the nature of sin and evil, it means that they are since they're in eternal opposition, it means that we're dealing with two independent principles. So somehow evil has been granted an autonomous existence in eternal opposition to divinity. So I wrote that good and evil are diametrical opposites, which means they are in eternal opposition, which unintentionally or not grants evil a permanent status relative to God. To contrast that with the Dharmic view, God is in everything, including the darkness. I know that sounds shocking, but hear me out, because there's a qualifier to that. This is what I am unpacking here is the qualified monistic view, not an absolute monism, but a qualified monism. So evil is temporary ignorance, not a state of permanent dual opposition. Thus, God exists in evil only to the extent that he experiences it or exists in it canonically. So kenosis is a very important term here. It's a Greek term that refers to God's voluntarily divesting himself in part of his divinity, such that, so for example, a good example of that in Christian theology, they say God voluntarily experienced kenosis when he sent the Logos into the world to take on human flesh. He experienced limitations, such that there were times when the Son apparently didn't know certain things, where he said, for example, only the Father knows the day or the hour. The Son of Man didn't know the day or the hour that certain things would occur. It's the same idea in Dharma, only God canonically manifests himself when he manifests this material universe, when he manifests the cosmos, and then when he multiplies himself among individuated consciences like you and me. So this ignorance results in sin or evil, which does not, however, hold permanence. It does not have permanence because it is not part of the fullness of who God is. It's not essential to him. Now, Orthodoxy would say that too. Orthodoxy would say evil does not possess positive being, and it is not a part of God. It's not part of him in any way, shape, or form. The problem is, because of this dualistic opposition they create between light and darkness, and granting inadvertently evil a kind of autonomous, independent status from God, they are indirectly granting evil being. That's my argument. So in this qualified monistic view of Dharma, evil is merely temporary because we possess the nature of God, and like attracts like, and the effect must ultimately return to its cause. We will find ourselves, and through difficulty and trial and suffering and struggle, as a result of learning the hard way what works and what doesn't, through potentially not innumerable, but many lives, we eventually reach quote unquote reabsorption. We are united with God such that ignorance or Maya, this illusion, no longer has a role in our experience. So God exists. Thus, God exists in evil only canonically, not essentially, for evil has no being. If there's anything that that requires clarification on any of that, feel free to ask. But I think that's about all that can be said on that for now. I'm going to sign off. It's already more than 20 minutes, and I typically keep these. My absolute longest video has only been maybe 23 minutes, and I want to keep it that way. I want to keep my longest videos at around 20 minutes, and try to keep these in bite-sized chunks, though. Stay around 5, 10, 15 minutes. Have a good day, guys, and see you again here soon.